I think that time and energy spent on loving awareness and gratitude, conscious gratitude, is time well spent. I really do.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Something for Everybody. My name is Aaron Machbitz. Michael, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you.
Absolutely. First and most important question is, how are you doing? Like, actually, for real, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm pushing 78, and I'm doing pretty well, I think. And and I was taking a look at the mug that I happened to grab, and it says "It Can Wait" on it, and it's got a kind of a picture of a sloth. I don't know if you can see it there, maybe there. and, and it was sort of, I was musing about how one of my daughters gave it to me as a kind of a hint to, stop being so compulsive. You should be sort of just relaxing. So anyway, just sort of a humorous little take there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, relaxing while you put out, a book that probably took you the last 10 years to write. So, yeah,
yeah,
you've been
yeah.
very much relaxing, right?
Yeah. Well, now comes, the second part is getting word out about it. Why should somebody read this book? What's in it for them? And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that.
Absolutely, we will. There's actually another book that you wrote that I wanted to first talk about,
Sure.
which is the marriage and family book.
Right.
And the reason I bring that up is because, like I told you before I hit record, I'm
Yes.
getting married in September.
Yes.
So, again, a
Congratulations.
very self-indulgent question, but like any insights, tips you have for a successful union, a successful partnership, lessons you've learned as a father and as a husband. I know that's sort of a large question, but take it
Well,
wherever you want to go.
it is a large question, obviously, and I'm speaking after I'm in my 53rd year of marriage now.
Hmm.
And as you probably know from reading the book, how my relationship with my wife came to be. And I mean, I can give a précis of it. Uh,
Please.
Basically, I was a kind of a newly found semi-post psychedelic yogi, if that kind of give those words mean anything to you, in the uh, in the early 1970s. And I had been sent to a silent yogi, a teacher who had just come to live in America, come to live in California from the Himalayas by the name of Baba Haridas. And Ramdas had introduced me to him. He had been Ramdas's teacher in India. And I just want to see how much detail to get into here. But basically, on my second visit to see this man, and I was in, I'll say right away, I was in great awe. I think I was about 22 years old, and I was in great awe and reverence of this famous yogi. And he immediately began to tease me. He kept saying, "Have you met Aparna yet?" And I said, "No, who's Aparna? What a weird name." And every now and then he kept saying, "Have you met Aparna yet?" And he didn't say, by the way, he wrote on a chalkboard. And he would turn the chalkboard up so everybody could see, and they could see that I'd become quite uncomfortable with this line of questioning, and I was projecting all kinds of stuff into, well, who's Aparna? Why does he think it's so funny? Why is he teasing me in front of all these people, etc.? And anyway, to cut a long story short, at the end, and a fairly uncomfortable story, by the way, because I really didn't know. There was a lot of energy behind his teasing me. So he had my attention, but not in the way that I sort of thought my attention would be held in the presence of a holy man. I thought we'd sit around and we'd meditate, we'd be kind of holy, and maybe we'd ask occasional questions. And but that was not to be. I came out of this meeting with Haridas very perplexed and somewhat frustrated. And someone handed me a slip of paper with an address in the city of Santa Cruz and said, "Go there. You'll meet Aparna there." So my friend and I drove into the city of Santa Cruz to this address. It was 12:30 at night. We knocked on the door, and a person came to the door, and she said, "Oh, Aparna lives here. Let me see if she's still awake." And 2 minutes later, in came this very beautiful, dainty, petite, long-haired, blonde woman that I had never seen before in my life. If there's anything I was certain of, that was it. So it was another head scratch, like, wow, this woman's very attractive and there's something about her, but I sure don't know her. Why is Haridas saying you know her? Anyway, after introductions were made and everything was kind of seemed sort of normal to the people that lived in the house because we had been sent there by Haridas. So it was sort of like a magic kind of name. And Aparna and I stayed up all night talking to one another in the kitchen, drinking tea. And finally, at about 5:30 in the morning, everybody was asleep in the house. I plucked up the courage and I said to her, I said, would you consider going to Maui with me? I've been thinking about going there for the winter and, practicing yoga and meditating in a nice warm place. And she said, well, why don't we throw the I Ching? So I said, okay. And she got her I Ching and we threw the I Ching together, each of us taking turns. And we got our hexagram and we began to read it. And one phrase stood out right away. It said, it furthers one to cross the great water. And of course, we were in California. The great water was between where we were and Maui. So we both smiled. It was the very first night that we met. And a few days later, off we went to Maui.
Wow.
So I'll fast forward in the story and just say that we were guided in a mysterious way, which I won't get into, to a tent in a rainforest where we were able to live for several months. And during that time, we decided that we would go back to Canada together, to Vancouver, where I was at that point living. So that's how we met. And the rest is that was at the very beginning. That was really in the first few months of our relationship. And but anyway, yeah, you can find out what happened, the rest of what happened in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
Now 53 years later, here we are.
Yeah. We're, we're grandparents and we have 5 grandchildren now. So
That's so beautiful. That's
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
Um,
So you have, but
yeah.
you
So
asked, you were gonna ask me a question, or you did ask me a question?
yeah, I asked, basically, yeah. So from all of your experiences with your wife and being a
Yeah,
partner,
yeah,
what insights can you share with me and everyone else
right.
to be a great husband or a great father?
Well, again, there's a lot that could be said about that, Aaron, but, just for the sake of, being as, simple as and spontaneous really as possible, I'll say one thing that's, kind of a principle or an ideal that I have held to and found to be very powerful is not going to bed angry.
Mm,
Where possible, working whatever needs to be worked through by mutual agreement. Um, it's a powerful metaphor. As soon as possible, I think not going to bed angry means working it through, and sometimes it's not possible to not be angry and to take angry feelings to bed. But there is a certain kind of commitment in a stance like that in a relationship, a long-standing relationship, is sometimes required because there are great passions and people are different. Men and women are different. Husband and wife are different. My wife is about as different from me as chalk and cheese. Honestly, I think she'd be the first to agree. And yet somehow the complementarity works. So the other thing I would say is that learn to give and receive feedback, which is inevitable, and necessary. Learn to give and receive feedback in a truly, how can I say, constructive and compassionate way. Um, that's a tool, it's not even, it's more than a tool. That again is a stance. It's a commitment to learning and to an approach in relationships, um, that I think is again, it's radical and it's necessary for growth, for personal growth, and for growth of the relationship itself, and for giving the other person, your partner, the space to go through whatever changes they need to go through. So I would say, I guess that just boils down to, respect, real respect, but it's also skilled respect, if I may say. It's not just, being obsequious. It's not that. It's learning how to really hear what's being said, where the person is coming from, taking it in, and dealing with, if it's uncomfortable in some way, dealing with whatever it is that's showing up. And that is, that's not something that eventually goes away. I think it continues. I think it's sort of part of the kind of the sandpaper, if you will, that we get given as individuals and in relationships to help one another, and that it happens by itself. So I think there was a metaphor we used to use in the old days called 100% to 0% responsibility, and it's a basic stance which I think pertains to your question, and it not only pertains to being in a relationship or in a marriage, but in a partnership, on a team, in one's relationships in general in life, and that is basically taking the point of view or the stance that I, as an individual, and I'm 100% responsible, not responsible in the sense of by blaming myself. No, no, no. Responsible, able to respond in a constructive way to help the situation, to move the ball further down the field, so to speak. And not justifying one's own behavior or blaming the other party for what they supposedly did. It's not about blame and justification. Blame and justification as a psychological structure, as a psychological habit, if you will, only reinforce the status quo or make the status quo worse. So you have to break that. You have to break that kind of conditioning of getting locked into the escalation. If this makes any sense to you, if you're following what I'm saying here.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, going back to feedback a little bit. The only reason that I am semi able to receive feedback well is because of my sports background.
Yeah,
And I feel like some people who don't have that, where a coach is telling them this or that, and they haven't received sometimes very harsh criticism, or sometimes criticism that's actually a constructive way. And sometimes, a lot of times, we have to like figure out all in the midst of what was said, what actually is beneficial to us and how we can take it on. But I feel like most people receive feedback in a defensive manner.
yeah.
How does one go about trying to maybe avoid that, especially with a partner or in a business situation, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah. I mean, I think that honestly, for me, it's an ongoing, um, it's an ongoing question. How do I make friends in the moment when something is arising? Somebody says something to me, and something then arises in me, and I don't like it, and I somehow want to defend against it. I want to justify myself. I want to say you don't understand, or whatever it is, But I'm basically defending myself in some way. How to come out of that habit? And I think I think it's a reoccurring habit. It is, at least it is in my case, and I've seen it in a lot of people where they go back to the sort of the fallback position of self blame. Um, so I think it's an ongoing process of unlearning that mechanism, and it gets trained in us as kids. Basically, in my case, my father, beat me up, and my teachers at school beat me up, and the other kids beat me up. And so I was trained, that if I didn't do it exactly, and in some cases I wasn't even able to do it right anyway because I was Jewish, and they took one look at me and it was pretty obvious. And that was enough. So, so I was trained into defensiveness at a very early age, and I dealt with it, and I do talk about it in my book, the sort of the things that I got up to deal with my defensiveness and my fear. Um, so I think it's a question of unlearning and moving into a new behavior. Unlearning when you find yourself contracting into that old way, moving out of it, choosing to move out of it, and learning to. It's like Velcro. Learning to kind of break the Velcro, so to speak,
Hmm.
and that I think is a kind of it's what they call in Sanskrit sadhana. It's a practice. It's one of the I think it's one of the primary yogic practices of learning to let go and trust. I guess you could say, let go and trust.
Yeah.
Um, Another way of saying it is let go and come into yourself.
Hmm.
Um, not an ego self, but let's call it a natural self, a more natural who you are without thinking, beyond or before you think about who am I. It's that. It's anyway. Let's not get too a little too esoteric, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And another thing you said at the beginning, which I want to touch on, is anger.
yes,
Um, I think about that a lot as a man, um, because I think that emotion specifically, when felt by men, is sort of demonized because one, I think a lot of bad things have happened when men get angry and don't know how
yes,
to deal with that anger. So I
hmm,
think then when we look at that emotion, the whole emotion is now demonized. So whenever I do feel it, I'm
yeah,
just going to push it away
yeah,
because the emotion itself is not bad, right? Obviously, as you know, but
yeah,
things have happened because of that emotion, like maybe your father who beat you and like maybe that was out of anger or whatever the case may be. So we
yeah,
could see that that's bad.
yeah,
But now I'm with my partner, my life, my love, my children, whatever the case may be, and I'm feeling this sort of anger.
yeah,
What can I do about it to not suppress it and put it away? Because eventually it's going to come out and it's going to burn my fucking house down. But I need to feel it in that moment, but not let it overtake me in some sort of way.
yeah.
So there's no real question there. I'm just sort of
Yeah,
spitballing about, what I've been thinking about anger.
one thing that came to mind about like when real anger comes up, and it obviously does, um, is, for example, really making a commitment, a personal commitment to leaving the field.
Hmm.
Like saying, you know what, if I stay here, I'm going to put my fist through the freaking wall. And
Right.
I know that that's not constructive. It's going to scare the hell out of my wife. It's probably going to land me in hospital with a broken wrist or something. And I know from previous experience, it's just not going to be helpful. My
Yeah.
commitment is just, I got to get out of here till I cool out. And, go off, take a walk for an hour or 2 hours. And it's hard being, there you are on the walk. You've made this commitment. You're seething. You're angry. You're hurt, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually the fire's kind of tamped down. A little more time goes by. And, I won't say that it seems humorous, but not yet. But it's like, okay, God, it's not such a big deal. I was getting too reactive there. Okay, calm down. It's not that important. In fact, it's not important at all, actually. So, like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I
that's
mean,
why,
because I think
there are
like
many,
even just
that's a
saying that
whole other
out loud
strategy. I think
to
the other
whoever you
piece
might
is
be angry with or the situation.
sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, so I'm just saying like that the just being honest about, hey, I'm feeling like quite angry right now. I feel like I'm going to make some poor
Yeah,
decisions, I'm going to go for a walk or I'm going to
Yes.
leave the situation is
Yes.
much better than just getting up and fucking leaving, right? Because then you
Yes.
leave that
Absolutely.
person
Yes. Yes.
in
Yes.
the dark. So I just think,
Absolutely.
you know, not only does it fall back in sort of the feedback, I'm giving you feedback about what I'm feeling in this moment. That's why I'm leaving. I'm not leaving because I don't love you anymore. I'm
Yes.
leaving because this is probably what's going to be best for us. And then when I come back, we can finish the conversation and not go to bed angry like you're
Very,
talking about. So I
very
think that's
important
important
points.
also.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you don't want to make leaving the scene an escalation to
Mm,
wrap things up. You want to actually have it be part, lead in the spirit where it's actually calming and soothing rather than, yeah, you can't do it. You've got to, in fact, have to be in a place where you're not, where you, for at least momentarily, are not angry. And, before you actually go. And, yeah.
yeah, very cool. Anything else to add to the insightful marriage wisdom that you might have?
I think appreciation, I'm just thinking about it is I, I think that everybody, it's very easy to take people for granted who are around you much of the time. Very, very easy. And so I think it's good to take a time out from time to time and make it about how much I appreciate what, who you are and what you mean in my life and what you do for me and for my family
Mm,
and so on. So I think there's, I think that, time and energy spent on, loving awareness and gratitude, conscious gratitude is time well spent. I really do. I think that it helps to build, being married and, raising kids it's a tough job. It's not easy. And yeah, sure, there is a romance to it, of course. I mean, the wedding and so on and so forth. But the reality of it is that it's a long, hard slog. There are a lot of sleepless nights. There's a lot of concern and worry on all kinds of levels. And gratitude often goes out the window. It's often the first thing to go, and you forget. And it's kind of becomes sort of it can become ho hum and even like I don't feel appreciated around here for what I do or for who I am even and so on. So I think making a conscious effort to come into remembrance, as it were, about what it is that what were the spiritual bonds, the spiritual reasons, if you will, that brought you together in the first place, and to do some hearkening back to that and tuning back into that, and not in a heavy formal sort of way, but just as a kind of an inquiry of sorts. I think it's good couples practice. And
yeah,
then, of course, if there are ongoing things where you feel like, we just get in each other's way and we can't really talk to one another, well, couple and family, I'm a big believer in couples and family therapy can be very, very helpful. I mean, I was
yeah,
trained as a family therapist. Um, and so I'm very biased in that way. I've seen a lot of good come from it.
yeah. I mean, there's always can be, not always, let's say, majority of time there can be good that comes from having a safe place to talk about what you're feeling, your needs.
Yes.
That's why a lot of people who post on social media about this sort of stuff say, like, you want to have a business meeting per se with your significant other where you're not talking about the kids or the plan. You're just talking about you and her and like what you didn't feel, what you did feel, what you need more of, what you need less of, what's happening, how do we feel intimacy wise, is there attraction still there, do we need to go on some more dates, like how do I need to make you feel more loved. It's like it's strictly a business meeting about the longevity of your relationship, because we do that with all I do that with my business and employees and the people I've worked for and my sports teams, and like, so
Yeah.
why don't we do that with what is the most important relationship in our life, like our
Yes.
spouse, our
Yes.
husband, our
Yes.
wife, whatever it is. So
Yes.
I always find that wisdom to be insightful too, and I've tried to do that with my fiance. She found it a little bit weird at the beginning that we were doing business meetings for our relationship, especially like 3 months into our relationship where like nothing is wrong, like everything is seems like it's all perfect. Now we're 3 years in, about to get married. Hopefully, it lasts a lifetime, God willing. And it just things just get a little bit more intense, but it's a good practice to start for anyone who's needing something.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah. Um,
So that's a long,
I,
it's a long subject. It's a
it
lot
is.
that
It
more that
is.
could be said. Yeah, yeah.
Um, I wasn't planning
I
on
wish you
asking
the
you about
best.
this.
Good luck with that, for sure.
Oh, thank you
Yeah,
very much.
yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
very much.
And let me just add to that, Aaron. I mean, from what you've said, I can tell, you're coming at it from a strong bank. Let's say strong emotional bank. So that's great.
I'm trying to. I'm trying to. There was a long period of my life where marriage and long-term relationship was just not something I was interested in. And so I made a few changes in my life. Some things happened that made me just look at life a little bit differently and how I wanted to see my future. And uh, so
Good.
I think my sports brain overtakes me, and I just sort of just go all in into the thing and try to learn as much as I can about it and sort of become obsessed. So I feel as prepared as possible, heading into it. But then my whole world will be thrown for a loop when I have my first kid. So we'll just who who freaking knows what's gonna happen there. But maybe I'll reach back out to you for any more insight on that. But it's an exciting
Sure,
time.
sure. Yeah, yeah. It's also a lot of
Um,
joy and a lot of fun
yeah.
and a lot of all the good stuff. I mean, truly, in ways that I cannot possibly describe. And I really mean that. Ways that, how can I say it, that make that in the heart level, give you an understanding of what it means to be a human being. I will say
Mm,
that. It's not the whole of life, but it is an aspect of life that's truly, well worth all the effort and awareness that you put into it and change of behavior and, and learning and etc. Definitely.
yeah. Yeah. I wasn't planning on asking you this, but I'm going to now because
Mm.
I think it might be important. But I know you're obviously a very spiritual man. But you mentioned being Jewish. I'm also Jewish. Um,
Mm.
has Judaism been a part of your adult life? Has it been a part of your kids' life, or how you raise them, or how do you think about that now?
Well, it's an ongoing question. I was brought up in an Orthodox Jewish home in South Africa, in Cape Town, South Africa. But my parents were not religious, but there was a very strong Jewish influence in our household because my mother was a survivor, and she and her family escaped Nazism by the skin of their teeth. So I was taken to Palestine from Austria, and her father was in Dachau, and he managed to get out, and the rest of the family was saved by in a kind of miraculous way, and they were all brought to Palestine. My father was a soldier in the British Eighth Army, the South African contingent of the British Eighth Army, and he met my mom at a dance for Jewish soldiers, and they were married in Tel Aviv in 1945, and I was born in Cape Town, South Africa, in 1946. So it was the year after the war. So don't remember exactly why I started telling you that story, but because of the Jewish thing. So my
Hmm.
parents were neither of my parents were religious. My father particularly went to synagogue on the Jewish high holidays like Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. For sure, he was there, but he never went on a Friday night and never on a Saturday morning. And but I went to Hebrew school. They still felt enough sort of into the Orthodox Jewish thing. And in South Africa, there weren't very many choices because there was only a very small population of Jews. It was only 120,000 Jews in the entire country when I was a kid. But anyway, um, where was I going with that? Um, the, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in South Africa. It didn't matter if you went to synagogue every Saturday and Friday night, whether you wore tzitzit or you wore a talis or a yarmulke, and nobody did, by the way. It just wasn't part of people. Jews in South Africa, I never saw anybody wearing a head cover or a tzitzit showing anything like that. Everything was hidden. but there was a lot of anti-Semitism, really huge amount of anti-Semitism, both with and I'm talking in the white population now, and there are two main parts of the white population in South Africa. One is the English from the British colonial times of South Africa, which was a couple of 100 years, and the most recent colonial power, by the way. And before that, the Dutch. So you had the two offshoots from that, the English South Africans and the Afrikaners. And the Afrikaners and English had gone to war literally gone to war against each other in the Anglo-Boer War at the turn of the 20th, at the beginning of the 20th century, 1899 to 1902. It was a big war. The British had 400,000 troops that they had arrayed against the Boers. And they put a lot of money and material into it, and they beat the Boers. But in the process, I'll just give you a quick little South African history. But in the process, the British incarcerated about 100,000 Afrikaner elders, women, and children, and 27,000 of them plus died, and were sick for the rest of their lives. And the Afrikaners never forgave the British for this. So there was a lot of animosity after the war between the English and the Afrikaners. And the Jews, the small minority, mainly Lithuanian Jews, by the way, were their origins, but were scapegoated by the Afrikaners and blamed for colluding with the British to keep the Afrikaners in poverty after the Anglo-Boer War. So that carried through for 60 years, to the point of where I myself, as a young Jew, had begun to, I failed Latin in grade 8, my first semester of high school, my first term of high school, and I got sent to a really godforsaken part of the Cape Province where there were only Afrikaners, and I couldn't speak a word of Afrikaans. So I suddenly was sent to a boarding school with these Afrikaners who hated Jews. And part of my book tells the story of what happened there. That's a kind of a chapter, two chapters, I think. So my Jewishness was not so much on the religious side. I kind of, I did what I had to do. I had a bar mitzvah. I learned to read Hebrew. I couldn't understand a word. I went to Hebrew school for 7 years. I tried to skim through as much as possible. It was a total, from my point of view, a complete waste of time, something that I was forced to do. I had no interest in. The teachers were really bad. They beat us with pine branch. I mean, it was bad, really bad. And so I had no interest in the religious side of things. No, to me, it seemed, I couldn't get into it with what I was exposed to, even though I would go to the synagogue because that's what was modeled by my parents. But the truth is, as soon as I had my bar mitzvah, going to shul went to the wayside, until it became a little useful to me when I went to boarding school, and I used it as an excuse to escape the rigors of the boarding school that I was in. But that's a little of how my Jewishness went. And again, by the time I finished high school, I was conscripted into the South African Army when I think I was 10 days after high school in the
Wow.
South African Army. And it was rife with anti-Semitism and violent anti-Semitism. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I'll just say that I wound up in an anti-Semitic incident, badly injured, and even the South African Defense Forces kicked me out. So that's how I got out of military service after a while. But it was through a Jew-hating incident. So my life in South Africa, which was until I was 20 years old, was full of anti-Semitism, violence, trying to fend off predators, and that kind of thing. And in 1967, when I was 20, the war in the Middle East broke out. And my life being, I was so miserable in South Africa, so depressed, and really didn't see a future at all for myself. And the Jewish agency said, "We want able-bodied young people to volunteer to go and help Israel." And I was so filled with idealism, so happy that the Israelis had won the Six-Day War, and it's a whole story of how it was in those days and being a Zionist, which was common at least in South Africa for young Jews, and how idealistic and how filled with how can I say filled with pride we were to volunteer to go and help in Israel, to go and live on a kibbutz. And of course, I began to discover the realities of that when I actually got there. And again, I write about this in the book about what happened when I got to Israel, and again dealing with my allegiance to my Jewishness, but again, not in the religious way so deeply. I would have been on the Democratic side in this whole brouhaha that's going on internally in Israel today. There's no question that I would be in that crowd. I would not, I would not be. I'm not for the vision of the greater Israel. I think it's folly. But I don't want to get into politics too much. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't.
Well,
Does that answer your question about the Jewish piece?
yeah, 100%.
And
Thank you
and
for
and, you know, and just bringing it forward to today, I'm
yeah.
in I'm in great pain about. I lived in Israel. I love Israel. But the vision of where I thought we were headed for in Israel is not the one that's being enacted, at least not right now. And I feel great. I feel a mixture of shame, horror, um, deep sadness, um, a lot of mixed feelings about it, to be honest. So it's very, very sad. It's very, very sad. I'm actually glad that my late mother didn't live to see this. I think it would have really upset her very deeply.
Mm,
I grew up
well,
with basically in my mother's milk, her telling me, wagging her finger at me, never forget Israel. Because her life had been saved by being there. Her whole family's life had been saved by being there. And she would always say to me, she said, never forget Israel. She would yell at me. And she says, when the chips were down, there wasn't a single country in the entire world that would give our family a visa. Only the right-wing Zionists in Israel came to Europe, came to Italy, and in a beat-up old tramp steamer, and took us to Israel. It was Palestine at that point. Took us to Palestine, and my mom would go on about this. It was a big thing. So I got a pretty hefty dose of that part of my Jewishness, and of course, my mother being a survivor, and a lot of stories also, which, by the way, are in the book. They're peppered in context in the book about my mother's family story of basically how they escaped and how my grandfather got out of Dachau and so on. So that's kind of a backdrop. So I do address, and it's in a very natural way, my Jewishness, because it was so much a part of me, particularly until I got to. After Israel, I went to Canada. I had two uncles, my mother's brothers, in Canada, who invited me to come and live with them. And so I went to Canada. And when I got to Canada, after a little while, I thought it'd be a good idea for me to get an education. So I started going to college. And after a short while, one of my professors said to me, this was in 1968, he said to me, "Hey, come over to my house on next Saturday." He said, "I've got some mescaline." He says, "I'd love to take a trip with you." And as you know, mescaline is the synthetic mescal, the essence of the peyote button, which the Mazatec Indians have been using in ceremonies for millennia. And so I said, "Wow!" And I had, I was completely straight, coming from South Africa and all, and really unworldly wise. But everybody around me, all my peers were doing this. They were transforming their consciousness. And so I was very excited about it. And I went over to his house on the appointed day. And I was extremely nervous. And he gave me he gave me the mescaline, and I took it, and he took it. And at first, I felt absolutely nothing for about 20 minutes or so, and then it was as though a massive force had taken me over.
Mm.
And I think this was the first time in my life that I ever experienced that there was a power that was inside me and outside me at the same time that was far more powerful than me. And at first I was trying to fight it. My old habits came up. Like, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to deal with this? And my immediate reaction was kind of contracting myself, fight to hold it, to be as, as kind of to hold it out. I'll be in control here. I'll control. And of course, this experience was way beyond my sort of puny attempts to control. And my mind was just looking for answers. How can I deal with this? What's happening here? What did I do? Why did I take this drug with this madman? I suspected that he couldn't be trusted. It's just a power trip. He's drugged me, all kinds of weird paranoid thoughts. But eventually I came to a place of where the only way out of this is not going to be with a stance, but almost the opposite of a stance. It's going to be through letting go. That's all I could come up with. I need to let go. I need to give up. I need to surrender. I need to relax. I need to let whatever this is, it felt like a python. The metaphor I used in the book is a python squeezing me. If this python is going to kill me, then it's far more powerful than me. There is no way it's going to kill me anyway. I'm not strong enough. And when I did that, when I let go, it was as though the python did kill that part of me.
Hmm.
And something else came out, which was one of the deepest, perhaps the deepest experience of my life, where I was connected. The I that I thought I was, not that I, but I was connected to it all, to everything. I knew that I was a part of the universe, that there was a force. And I had known moments like that in sports myself, by the way. I wasn't in your level, but I was a good, schoolboy athlete. And, I played rugby and cricket and I was a good athlete. I was a runner also. So I had known moments where you're in the zone,
Oh, yeah.
but nothing like this. This was like the zone, plus, plus, plus. And it was a profound, profound awakening. And it changed my life, because it was after that I was exposed to a tape recording of a man by the name of Dr. Richard Alpert, who was Timothy Leary's co-professor at Harvard. And he had gone to, and the two of them were notorious for turning their students onto psilocybin, and eventually both getting fired for going over some red lines at Harvard. Let's just, to keep the story simple, let's just say that. And Alpert went to India in search of, and he took with him a bottle of White Lightning LSD, which was 305 micrograms per pill. It was the strongest LSD, and he told me this personally, by the way. The strongest LSD that to that point had ever been made, and it was 305 micrograms, and just one of those pills would be enough to knock anybody's socks off. But he took this anyway. He took this bottle to India, and whenever he saw somebody that looked like a holy man or a yogi, he offered them a pill. So everybody took it. He said, "Yeah, I'm going to check out your enlightenment." And everybody, of course, failed. They all, for one reason or another, failed his test. But eventually he got to the Himalayas, and he was introduced to a grizzled old man with a blanket. And the little old man demanded 3 pills. And he took the 3 pills, and he sat around twinkling all day. Nothing at all happened to him. And then he said to Alpert, he said, he basically recounted that Albert's mother had gotten spleen cancer a few months before and that she had recently died just before he came to India. And here he was. I mean, he's like, thousands of miles from America. Nobody in India knows him or knows anything about him. And this little old man, a complete stranger, is telling him about his mother. So he really had his mind blown. And this little old man with the blanket, his name was Neem Karoli Baba, became his guru and gave him a new name. Richard Alpert became Ram Dass.
Mm.
And then Ram Dass went into training with a yogi by the name of Baba Haridas. Baba Haridas was a silent yogi who lived nearby the temple where Ram Dass had met Neem Karoli Baba. And he spent months in training with him, and then came back to America and started giving these talks about how psychedelics point to the possibility of a spiritual path. And that in fact, if you trod a spiritual path, you could attain enlightenment without the need for psychedelics. So anyways, I heard this lecture and it really blew my mind. It was like God had handed me my next sort of piece of direction. And in those days, feeling a sense of direction, when I was that age, it was very, very important to me. But when I heard this message from Ram Dass, it really affected me profoundly. So much so that I wrote him a letter and I told him that I was an immigrant from South Africa, that I had a terrible relationship with my father, had all kinds of incompletions in my life. I just sort of laid it all out there, but that I was really interested and I wanted to get free and, and so on and so forth. And I sent it off to him. Oh, and I said, and would it be possible for you to come and give a talk? And at the time I was living in Montreal. So he wrote back and he said, yeah, sure, set it up. So cut a long story short, he came to Montreal. We went on the radio together. For a short time, I became his road manager and traveled around setting up these happenings for him and so on. And then he led me to a more serious teacher, to Haridas, who had come to live in California. So, and then of course, the story of how Haridas introduced me to my wife.
Yes.
So,
amazing.
Yeah. So then, I'll just say that I had begun writing when I was in my 20s, when I had co-founded a yogic group, a Haridas yogic group in Vancouver. And I began writing during that time and self-publishing. I had some sort of early attempts at self-publishing on behalf of this spiritual group that I was a part of. But I learned a lot about publishing. And then I was able to, at first by myself and then later with my wife, able to get 4 or 5 books published. A marriage and family book, Ways of Being Together, the complete guide and cookbook for raising your child as a vegetarian. Boy, that's a mouthful. And so on. And but we were poor. We looked like we were being very successful in the outer world, and we perhaps had some prestige. But the truth is, we were a poor family. It's very tough to make a living as a writer. So I was sort of really wanting to do something. I felt like yes, I could write, but it wasn't a way to make a living. And by then I had 2 kids. And one day I'm taking my dog for a walk and in the cemetery near where we're staying. And I run into this old guy and he introduces himself. He tells me he's my neighbor. And he says, well, what do you do? And the only thing I could think of was, well, I've written a few books and I helped to found a yoga community out in Vancouver. He said, oh, I'd love to see one of your books. He said, so the next day I'm out there, I meet him again. I give him a copy of the marriage and family book. He takes it. 2 days later, we meet again. He hands me my book back and he says, have you thought about going back to school? And I said, no, I was 33 at the time. I said, no, I'm 33. I couldn't possibly think about going back to school. I had less than 2 years of college under my belt at that point, but I had these books. So he said, there's a program at the University of Massachusetts that that is interested in people like you, people who've made some kind of contribution to knowledge, but don't have the formal credentials, and they will often waive the formal credentials because of your accomplishments. Go and see this woman. Her name was Norma Jean Anderson at the University of Massachusetts. So I went to meet Dean Anderson and was invited directly into the master's degree program, and then into the doctoral program. So that's how I got a master's degree and doctorate. I was, kind of invited into the University of Massachusetts through meeting, this old guy in a cemetery. Really, that's the story. It's amazing. And so that, again, was another big turning point in my life, where this is the Kismet side of the story. It wasn't all the karmic side that I describe in part one. The Kismet side, the seeking side, is, the whole of the middle part of the book is about the seeking, the Ramdas part, the taking of the period of the psychedelics, the psycho-spiritual groups that I went through, and so on. It's, from what I've heard, people say it's quite vividly described. It's not boring. It's interesting, and so yeah. The Kismet side. So that led to adjustments that I can only say that I couldn't, even if I was the smartest tack in the box, which I certainly am not. I could not have thought up these things that happened. There's no way. It was almost like an unseen hand basically said, well, this is the next person you need to meet. And that next person would give me something that literally would change my life. And so there are several meetings that take place like that, where the direction of my life is either changed radically or it's changed in a subtle but important way.
Yeah. And that led you to leadership and coaching?
Yes.
That was the next step in your journey?
After I got my doctorate, my mentor at the time, Jack Rosenblum, who was a very accomplished, 30-year experienced guy, said to me, look, there's an outfit in Boston called Innovation Associates. They're the top of the world right now. And I just gotten my doctorate. So I was kind of green. I had the title, but I was really very green in terms of being in the field and really being able to play at a high level, which I wanted to do. And he said, well, you got to take this course called Leadership and Mastery. It's put on by these wizards at Innovation Associates in Boston. So I signed up for the course and I took it, and it really blew my mind. And these guys had been able to put together a lot of the thinking, the humanistic psychology, which was part of my background, as well as the systems thinking, which was also part of my background in family therapy. They had been able to put that together in a kind of in language and a package that would appeal to people who were leading organizations. And they taught me, basically how that could be done. They taught me how to present myself. And I guess you could say, I think it's fair to say that I was a product of the times. I was a kind of a fairly hippie-esque guy. I had done all of I had been through the whole kind of 60s, 70s thing. And here I was coming out the other side, and I'm some of the kind people that I met on the way helped me to kind of to smoothen some of the rougher parts of those edges that were left, so that I could present myself, still have the same values, but present myself in the world and not freak people out. So these people at Innovation Associates liked me, and they offered me a job. So I went from freshly getting my having my dissertation signed to walking into a very high level, you could call it an apprenticeship of sorts. and where I was, training with very high level consultants and learning the tricks of the trade, and being taken under. Eventually, I was taken under the wing of the innovator himself, Charlie Kiefer, the founder, and learned a tremendous amount. Going around with him, and eventually learning to swim on my own. And at first with his guidance, and then basically it became like, wow, I can do this. I can fly. I know how to do this work, and it started to come from the inside out. And so then began a career. Then I went off on my own. I started my own kind of boutique consulting. I mean, it wasn't even really a consulting firm. It was a humble thing. It was me, and I would pull in some trusted people that I knew when I needed them. And it was a kind of, sometime expandable, semi-expandable organization that, that could do that at the drop of a hat, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so we went around. I went over, I've been to many countries in the world. I worked in Europe a lot, Canada, many places in the United States. And eventually at a high level, I consulted, at a very high level. One of the gigs was the integration of the Global Alliance for Vaccine and Immunization into the United Nations, and
Wow.
Gavi, as they were called, were a client of mine before, and then things came to pass, and they were basically being absorbed into the UN, and I helped with that transition. And I work with the MacArthur Foundation, with the top management there. So amazing things happened. And when you start working at that level, I'm sure you well know, things just start to happen. Other people somehow think you have some kind of magic, and they
Hmm.
come to you and they sort of, they want your services. So so
Yeah, it's
it's,
really hard to get to that point. But once you do, it just starts to be very, free flowing because yeah, for one reason or another, you've gained people's trust. They think you're an authority, whatever the case may. Most of the time it's true, right? No one has it all figured out. That can't be true, but you do have some way of going about this business that
yes,
uh is
yes,
different than everyone else because all these principles, as you know, have been around
yeah,
forever. They're all the same principles.
of course,
It's just like how you say it, your wording, maybe your personality, your charisma, the compassion you speak with. Those
yeah,
things make you unique in what draw people in. I think that the principles and beliefs are necessarily all the same. Like at least the good ones who are doing the
yes,
good work,
yes, of
like
course,
responsibility and accountability and ownership and
absolutely,
all of those sorts
right,
of
right,
things.
right, right, right. One of the things, just while you're on that, Aaron, one of the things that at the time to me really opened my eyes was a question that my mentor, my boss at Innovation Associates, kept asking clients, and I really was like listening to this, and I could see it. It was a very, very powerful question, and the question was, "What's the desired result here? What do you really want here? What are you trying to accomplish here?
Hmm.
What do you want?" And that is a very, very provocative, because you can get a quick answer, comes quickly, but when you really ask deeply, what do I really want here? It may be a little different than you first assumed.
Yeah, that's a power. It's always going to be a powerful question
Yes.
because most people don't actually know. They
Yeah.
don't know what they're moving towards. And like
Yes.
again, coming from an athlete space, most great athletes are running away from something, not running towards something. And there's a big
Yes.
difference. I have been
Yes.
working through that my whole
In
life.
fact,
Like, the
in
chip
my
on your
book, there's a
shoulder
whole
and
thing where Haridas says to me, when I'm leaving the community that I helped to co-found in Vancouver, I'm leaving it, and he writes to me when I'm now in Massachusetts. He writes to me, and I've been complaining about, well, I'm sort of at sea now. He writes, "It is better to go towards something than away from something else."
Mhm. Yeah.
It's exactly what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, because when you're running away because of fear. When you're running
Yes,
towards something, you're like,
yes,
the possibility there of
yes,
becoming is much more powerful.
yes,
Um, and I think that's very cool. But not, but like the running away from something will get you very far. It's a great motivator, because it is like, I cannot be this person. This person is weak and small, and I have to run away from them as fast as possible by
Yeah.
working 12 hours a day and doing all this and this and this and this.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets you to a pretty good point. But
Mm-hmm.
as you know, it's like, it's not sustainable. It's not healthy.
Right.
Like, but when you get presented with a different idea of like, there's a different way, people are worried, because they're like, well, I'm going to lose my edge now. This is my fucking edge when I get on the field or in the business domain or in business meetings, or like, this is my edge, that I have this. Like, if I do a different way, will I not be the same person? No, you won't be the same person, but you can still have that edge, because these are still the qualities that you possess. You can just
Absolutely.
present them in a new, healthier, sustainable way. And I think that's
Yeah,
that's what
absolutely.
we're all trying to move towards now, at least in this
Yes.
sort of self-help, personal
Yes,
development
yes,
space.
yes.
So,
Yeah.
there was one thing to just wrap up this conversation. As you look at your website, which people should go to, you have, as we're talking about principles and beliefs, one of them is suffering is often self-created. And I just wanted to get
Yes.
your take on that as we sort of put a bow on this conversation.
Yeah. I think that, listen, first of all, we talk to ourselves. We have unconscious thought reactions, emotions, sensations in our body, and thoughts. And oftentimes we tend to believe those thoughts in the moment. We tend to believe them. And that's a kind of let's call it a self-defeating feedback loop that, if you remain in, is actually detrimental and unhealthy in the long term. And it's disempowering. And so getting to a place of really making a choice and stepping into something new is what's called for. But first, it's sort of a recognition of that I'm falling into the old way of reacting here. So again, it's one of those ongoing, moment to moment pieces of sadhana, pieces of work that we are called to, and God forbid we get arrogant and think that, oh, I'm above that. No, you'll be shocked. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, where people can go to find you, where they can get the book, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, if I may, here's a picture of the book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oops. And they can find me at michaelshandler.com, and it's Michael SHANDLER.com.
Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.